as head of Voodoo, of course, we are concerned. We are concerned about the speed or the rate of things moving forward in the country, particularly after the January 12th events, which is the earthquake that we have had. I think we could have done better. We could have done much, much better. Imagine you'd have a 747 plane flying, except that instead of going away, it stops on top of the house. That's the sound it makes. Ooh, and non-stop. The place where you sit, lifted up at least a foot high. Wow. And boom, down. That's strange. House don't usually do things like this. While you're thinking of that, it does it twice again. Boom, boom again. Say, oh, that's funny. So you call your wife, which is there. Say, come on, let's turn up and do something. And he did that again a couple of times before doing the backward and forward. All over the place, fine. And I'm very happy about that. I'm very, very glad. Fortunate. I feel that very few people have been so fortunate. 300,000 dead. More than a quarter of a million people dead, flat. And the rest, they're going to suffer. I mean, 1 million is what you see in all the public squares and the tents. And they have been suffering ever since, and they are still suffering. And the rest trying to help those. They were grabbed with those big teeth, those cranes, and that they just come and grab everybody together, your leg in the holes, your head somewhere here, and simply drop in the holes. I think it was undignified, and I screamed. I said, you cannot do that, because we have beliefs, and in our belief, a body is sacred. Not because the body itself, the flesh and bloods, are sacred, but because it houses the real you, which is sacred. The real you is your soul. Your soul is nothing else but part of God. I can safely say that 67% of the Haitian people are Voodooists. Voodoo is like a big body which would have many heads. And one of the heads would be Christians, Catholics, and the other one Protestants, and the one Voodoo. Most people, in fact, that I've met in the world, they have their own ideas about Voodoo. But those ideas that they have usually came from Hollywood. We have ideas, our own ideas about creation. It certainly doesn't resemble the idea of Adam and Eve, or Eve swallowing a bad apple, or giving bad apple to her husband, and having to pay that with the Greek mythology. Voodoo is the tradition of the Haitian people. We say for us it is like our flesh and blood, because in fact removing that from us, what is left? We'll say nothing. In fact, this is the way we view all our type of relationship. That's the way we view ourselves in the universe. That's the way we stand among, I would say, the sun and the moon and the stars and earth and everything that exists, with the trees and the plants and the animals, those in the water, those on earth. We are part of the whole thing.
That is playing out right now. I'm curious what you think how this speaks to the legacy of that colonialism.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So the legacy is that the Haitians were made an example of. They were told by the U.S. and the other colonial powers, you cannot do this.
Right.
There will be no liberation. There will be no self-emancipation. And if you, as enslaved people, take power, the white world, the Western world, will do everything in its power to salt the earth on which you live, to destroy your country, and make sure that you are suffering for generations and generations and generations. And it's not too much to say that more than 200 years later, they are still being made an example of.
Kahala Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahshai Ba'Shem Ruach, which are the true Hebrew names of the Most High Father, Yahweh, which is Hebrew for He is, and His only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, which is Hebrew for He is salvation. Double honors, my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, where the house of David be born again in this generation. And shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the tribe of Levi and how today they are known as the Haitian people. So, in the videos we just watched, the first video is a summary of the current lifestyle that dominates the nation of Haiti. They are deeply steeped within the voodoo customs, or basically of the left-handed angels. And one of the reasons behind that is because the tribe of Levi, when you get into the Bible, this is the tribe that was chosen to perform the rituals and ceremonies for the tribes of Israel. Okay, they were the one who were the most endowed with the knowledge of the rituals and basically interacting with the spiritual realm for the rest of the nation of Israel. Now, going into who Levi was. Levi was the son of Jacob, okay, whose name was changed to Israel, and he comes from the first wife of Jacob, Leah. Right? He was you can see him here. He's born, and like I said, the descendants of Levi today are known as the so-called Haitians. Now, when Levi was born, the reason why he got his name Loya was from this scripture. This is Genesis 29:34. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi, or Loya, which basically means joined on to me. Okay? And that right there is a nomen omen. Right? Nomen omen means basically name prediction, because the tribe of Levi would ultimately be called on to be a portion of the 12 tribes that would be given on to the Lord. Right? They would be joined on to God to perform the rituals of the temple, to watch over the sacraments and all that stuff. Now, one thing about Levi is that he was also given a prophecy, just like his brethren, from our forefather Jacob, right, Israel, of what would befall him in the latter days. Now, when we read Levi's prophecy, it is a combined prophecy with his brother in Simeon. Okay? And let's just read it real quick. This is Genesis 49:5. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly, mine honor, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Now, this here is the combined prophecy of what would befall Simeon and Levi. Now, because how it is a combined prophecy, this tells us that these two tribes would be joined together somehow in the end times. But notice how it also tells you here that it says that they will be divided in Jacob. Well, when you get into the nation of Haiti and Dominican Republic, these are Levi here on the left and Simeon here on the right. Okay, Levi was of the southern kingdom, towards the end of the split when the nation of Israel divided in two. Simeon was of the northern kingdom. Okay, and like it tells you in that prophecy that they were brethren and that they were ultimately going to be divided. Their prophecy, being a joint prophecy, meant that they were going to be together in the end times. But like it said, they were going to be parted from each other. Now, that being said, we're going to focus on the Haitians, right? Levi. Now, if you want to get more into the tribe of Simeon, you can go ahead and go through my video library. You'll see the tribe of Simeon there, breakdown of theirs. Now, Levi, being here in Haiti, when you get into this word, the word even goes back to a Hebrew word. Okay, so besides them having that spiritual marker on them that they're very spiritual, hence, unfortunately now they've gone off and they've delved into the left hand, spirit side, which is why, like that man said, right, about 60% of Haiti is deeply steeped into the art of voodoo, right, basically witchcraft, right? But besides that, a lot of the rest of the Haiti, they're into, just believing in a higher power. And that's because, again, we are the Israelites, and hence we have it within us to seek after God, right? What does it tell us in Romans? That it says, what then? Israel hath not obtained that which it seeketh for, but the elect have obtained it, but the rest were blinded. Well, that thing that we are seeking for, that is a reconnection with God, right? And unfortunately, a lot of our people are blinded on how to get that connection, right? Especially those of our people who are dealing with the left hand. Though they do connect with the spirits, which is a form of being connected to a power which God provides, it is still a wicked, connection. And like the Messiah said, right? Anybody who comes up another way other than through the sheepfold is a thief and a robber, right? Basically, you're going about this in a wrong way, and you're going to be judged for that. Now, that being said, let's get into the breakdown of Haiti. Okay, when you get into that word, what Haiti's original name, when you look it up, it's Haiti. All right, it says Haiti's original name was Haiti, which comes from the Taino language. Now, the Tainos were basically the native Indians upon these islands. In this case, it'd be the native Indians on that island, which were the Simeonites. Now, later on, during the North Atlantic slave trade, the Edomites, right, the so-called Caucasian race, brought over the tribe of Levi, along with the tribe of Judah, along with the tribe of Benjamin, and basically the slaves that they had brought over during the North Atlantic slave trade upon the nation, upon the Haiti, they placed the Levites that they had captured or that they had bought from the Hamites and the Ishmaelites over in Africa. Now it tells you, it says, the name translates to land of mountains or flower of high land. Now really, when you get into that word, the beloved elder Kazak breaks down this word, and he brings out a beautiful edifying lesson, which we're going to go ahead and get a part of, which pertains to this name breakdown. But I'm going to go ahead and put a link to his lesson, so if you want to watch it, I highly recommend it. so you get into the full breakdown of it. But let's go and cover just this part.
The original word for Haiti, okay, Haiti went back to Ayiti, which goes back to this, Ayathia, which means mountain with me. Okay, mountain with Yahweh, basically. Because the Levites were joined to Yahweh. They were joined unto him. Now I have this book here, Christopher Columbus and the Participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese Discoveries by Dr. M. Kaeserling. We're going to go straight to the point. Let's go to the point. All right, this is on page 98. Starting right here. Roldan's chief argument in support of his view is the language of the Indians in Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, and the adjoining islands. He contends that it has many resemblances to Hebrew. In fact, he even calls it corrupted Hebrew. He asserts that such names as Cuba and Haiti are Hebrew, and we showed that. And that they were first applied by the earliest caciques, the chiefs or leaders. It says Kassin, which really is Quatazayan. You know, the chiefs there. Basically, Quatazayanyam, who discovered and peopled the islands. All right? So that's the point. The Taino spoke Hebrew. And the Lord knew in the spirit, he knew in the spirit that the Levites would go to the island of Haiti because he sent them there by way of slavery.
So that breakdown explains how the name Haiti goes back to that broken Hebrew name, which ultimately goes back to joined onto me, right? Which is the name for Levi. So again, this is how we understand that the Haitians, through all those spiritual markers, are today really the tribe of Levi in their captivity. Now, that being said, besides the Levi getting a blessing from our forefather Jacob, the descendants of Levi also were given a blessing from Moses, which you can find in Deuteronomy 33:8. It says, "And of Levi he said, let thy Thummim and thy Ummim be with the Holy One, whom thou didst prove at Massa, and with whom thou didst strive at the waters of Meribah, who said unto his father and to his mother, I have not seen him, neither did he acknowledge his brethren, nor knew his own children. For they have observed thy word and kept thy covenant. They shall teach Jacob thy judgments and Israel thy law. They shall put incense before thee, and whole burnt sacrifices upon thine altar. Bless Yahweh B'Shem Yahshai, his substance, and accept the works of his hands. Smite through the loins of them that rise against him, and of them that hate him, and that they rise not again." Now, this here was a fairly long, blessing from Moses for this particular tribe. But let's go and break it down. When it tells you here about let his Thummim and Ummim, this basically means his Thummim meaning perfection and Ummim meaning light, right? Basically, his wisdom and his light, right? So basically, Levi is going to have that connection with the Lord, right? And he's going to be making righteous judgment for the most part, right? Because again, remember, Levi was the priest that lived amongst all the tribes, right? Remember, he was not given land as an inheritance. When you get into the land of inheritance of the tribes, you don't see a land that was given onto Levi. And that's because Levi was living amongst all tribes, and they were basically given a tenth of each nation, right? They were basically given cities within these states, I guess you call them, right? These tribal regions, for them to perform their ceremonies for the children of Israel. Next, let's get into it. It says, "When thou didst prove at Massa, and with whom thou didst strive at the waters of Meribah. Because remember, the descendants of Levi, when they were coming out with the other children of Israel, and they were, in the wilderness with Moses, a lot of them kind of would stand up against Moses and trying to take, Moses' seat. And a lot of them had to be judged because of that. Okay, that's what that's talking about. When it says here, he said unto his father and his mother, I have not seen him. That ultimately goes into how Levi was ultimately part with his other brethren when they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, who then took him to Egypt. And when it says he did not acknowledge his brethren or know his children, this just goes into how the Levites ultimately rose up high in power and ultimately were very prideful in their stance because of their power within the tribes and being connected to the priesthood. This is why when you get into the time of the New Testament, when you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees, you had the whole priest class that had just become fully corrupted, and they were just fully enthralled with the doctrines of men, which was like what's known as the Jerusalem Talmud, right? Which were the teachings of the priests, which came out of the Babylonian captivity. And then next it tells you about how ultimately they were going to serve the Lord, burn incense and do sacrifices. Basically, they were going to perform the righteous acts. Because remember, it was in the wilderness that the Lord ultimately had given onto Levi the job of being his portion, right? And to perform his rituals. When you get into Leviticus and Numbers, it tells you about how Levi and Aaron and the children of Aaron were going to be the ones to manage the temple and the ceremonies. Now, next it tells you about, it says, bless Yahweh, his substance, and accept the works of his hands. And then here, this is the point I wanted to get, smite through the loins of them that rise up against him, and of them that hate him, and they that they may not rise up again. Now, remember, like in the second video in the beginning of this lesson, you had those Edomites talking about how the westernized world, basically the Edomite Empire, has come up against the Haitians because of what they did. The nation of Haiti, the Levites, were the only nation of the 12 tribes to free themselves from Edomites' captivity, right? But because of that, because how they had, basically killed off the French and basically won their freedom, the Edomite Empire that's built around them has made them pay, even till today. The nation of Haiti still pays very high tax, and they're pretty much indebted to these Edomites, because though these Edomites can't basically beat them physically, they're making them pay a penalty. And how do they do that? Well, Edom gets them through their magic, bureaucracy, taxes, and all that type of stuff. This is why even till today, Edom is trying to go into Haiti, and basically, they killed off their president. They set up a puppet. They even try to bring over Hamites from Africa over to Haiti to police them. But right now, there's a huge gang resistance there in Haiti. Because why? Well, because Levi has a different spirit onto him. He received that blessing that he would be able to rise up against those who hate him. So there's that. Now, how did Levi get into this state? How did they become captives at one point and ultimately end up on the other side of the world, where the majority of them don't even know where they go back to? They just believe that they're Haitians or freed slaves from Africa. Well, you see, there was a prophecy that would fall upon our people, which also affected Levi. It tells you here, this is Jeremiah 17:4. And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled the fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. Now, what happened is, after the Messiah came, and he was crucified and he rose, then he went off to be with the Father. There was about 40 years that took place. And in these 40 years, Jerusalem started to become a massive thorn in the Roman Empire's side. So much so that in 70 AD, the Romans decided to just make an end to Jerusalem. And in doing so, the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin, and the tribe of Levi were decimated. Many of them went into captivity and were put into the Roman slave markets. Others fled into the surrounding areas, into the surrounding nations, and they traveled throughout the Silk Road trade routes. But the majority of them that didn't go into slavery and didn't flee into the surrounding nations went into Africa, just like our forefathers. Now, these Romans ultimately commemorated this victory by setting up an arch of triumph. And it's crazy because I went here when I was young. Before I came into this truth, I was maybe what? It was like in 2006, 2007 that I went to Rome, and I actually walked under this arch, right? This whole arch is right there where the old Senate was at, and you go in there, but I wasn't woken up to this truth yet, so I didn't really understand what I was walking through, or didn't even understand really the significance of this, right? When you get into the arch, you can see that stele here showing the menorah being carried away by these Roman devils, right? And these Romans were basically Edomites, okay? Or the people that you would refer to today as the so-called Caucasian and Israeli races. That being said, when the nation of Jerusalem was destroyed and plundered, a lot of the Israelites that weren't, like I said, taken into the slave markets and didn't flee into the surrounding nations, a lot of them fled into the south, into Africa, where they would stay refugees for 1,500 years before they would be brought over here to the Americas. Now let's go and read that. That history can be found here in this book called Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor. It says, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews, right, basically so-called Negroes, fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. So you see that? So after Jerusalem fell, many of them fled into the surrounding areas, but the majority of them fled down into Africa. A lot of them made their way to Carthage. Remember, Carthage was a friendly Israelite town that had been founded by the descendants of the king of Tyre, right? Also, a lot of them went down into Yemen, the Arabian Peninsula, Ethiopia, but the majority of them, including the Ashanti tribe, which is where predominantly the tribe of Levi came to, rested here on the west coast of Africa. Now, when you get into history, you can look at examples and basically echoes of Israelites that were dwelling in Africa. Okay, this is where you get the empire of Timbuktu, Mansa Musa. Basically, like even this man here, right? It tells you, it reads, the Ashanti War. It says Ashanti ambassadors crossing the Pra in 1874. Now, when you look at this Ashanti ambassador, basically leading these English soldiers, what's on his chest? Well, it's an ephod, okay? And this man here, he was a ruler over the Ashanti people, right? He was an ambassador, okay? So this is why he's leading these Edomite soldiers into that period, because when you get into, if you watch that movie, Shaka Zulu, you'll see how the British Edomites were in Africa basically trying to conquer it. Okay, along with a bunch of these other Edomites of the different nations. right? You had the Germans, or at that time there was the Belgium, right, with just a bunch of devils. A bunch of the European Edomite nations had basically started to carve up Africa. But the point here is that you see things like this. You see little examples of Edomite remnants, like the residue of our people and our culture within, history like this, right? Why would this man be wearing an ephod if in him being of a high position within this tribe? Well, that's because he descends from the Levites that came out of Jerusalem and fled into Africa and were there for 1,500 years and ultimately survived the sub-Saharan slave trade that took place around 600 AD all the way up to about 1300 AD, and then was around until the North Atlantic slave trade started in the 1618 to about 1830, right? So that's why you see things like this. Now, there's a big misconception that it was blacks selling blacks into slavery. Now, that couldn't be further from the truth, because just because you have, for example, let's say black cats and black dogs, doesn't mean they're the same. Okay, and it's the same thing with so-called Negroes and true Africans, right? Right here in the Bible dictionary, it tells you plain out. It says, Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and Canaanites. You see that? So no, it wasn't blacks selling blacks. It was Hamites selling Israelites, who they did not want in their land, because those Israelites had rose high in that society, and they were basically seen as refugees or invaders of that land. So of course they would capture them, enslave them, and sell them off, for profit. Now, this here ultimately, the selling off and being brought to America, was all part of prophecy. Along with that prophecy that I just read in Jeremiah, how the children of Israel would lose their heritage, they would forget who they were. It was all part of God's plan, that we would have a great falling away, that we would be led, into the 4 corners of the earth, and we would forget ourselves, right? We would be punished for going off and worshiping these other gods. Now, that being said, let's read that curse that came upon us. This is Deuteronomy 28 and 68. And Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Buy you here, ultimately, when you get into that word, it means redeem you. Okay? Now, this ultimately happened to both the northern kingdom that came over here in, 600 BC, and the southern kingdom that came over here in the 1600s. Okay? We both came over here to the land of our captivity, which is what Egypt represents. This is why it says Egypt again, right? Because again, Egypt for us was basically bondage. It was captivity. Well, we both came over here to the Americas, where we both would serve our captivity. Okay? Now, let's go and read it real quick. This right here can be read in the Apocrypha. This is 2nd Ezra 13 and 40. Now, I'm going to read to you the first part, but the point I want to get is in the very last part of this. And actually, let me actually get to the scriptures, because this doesn't have that part. But from 40 on to 45 is talking about the northern kingdom, the Latinos and Native Americans. But right here in 46 is talking about the southern kingdom. But let's just read this real quick. This is 2nd Ezra 13 and 40. And those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoner out of their own land in the time of Hoshea, the king whom Salamansar, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters And so came they into another land. Right? We went to Assyria. We stayed there for about 100 years. After they were conquered by the Babylonians, Nineveh fell, and then we were for the most part free. 41. But they took this counsel amongst themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. This is the Americas, because again, all the Eastern Hemisphere was known at that time by the people living on that side. Nobody knew about the New World, Americas, right? Other than King Solomon, who had the records, who had the knowledge to come over here, which is why we have that knowledge, okay? Verse 42, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely 1.5 years, and the same region is called Azareth. Azareth means another land, and when it says here 1.5 years, that is indicative to the time that the Hamite navy of King Solomon, how long they would take to come here to the Americas and go back, right? They would take them 3 years, 1.5 years to come here to the Americas, and 1.5 years to go back. Now, the point that I want to get to. Then dwelt they there, right? The Latinos would dwell there in the Americas until the latter time, until the end days. And now, when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. So this here is talking about, so not only did the Lord bring over the northern kingdom from 40 to 45 here, but right here 46 is talking about how he would also bring the southern kingdom to the same region of the earth to meet up with the northern kingdom, right? So that way both the northern and southern kingdom of Israel, that being the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, would be in the same area in the end days until the latter time. That is why the Haitians are in fact the tribe of Levi, and they are dwelling there on that island that is divided by with their brethren, the tribe of Simeon. Because again, why? Well, because it's biblical prophecy. Okay, and hopefully this video explains how the Haitian people are in fact the tribe of Levi. So with all that, let's give all honor and glory and praises to Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahushai, Ba'Shem Ruach HaKodesh. Shalom.